Hearken, dear listener, to Comedy in a Nutshell, where mirth and meaning do entwine. What say the jesters when they speak plain of their sacred craft? What is comedy? A blade, a balm, mirror or mask? We parley with the mirthful minds who jest for coin or cause. Lend thine ears and be made wise. I'm the comedy nerd who's seen more than 1,800 different comedians perform live comedy, and you can find out more about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. Please also take a moment to like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a writer, actor and former president of the Cambridge Footlights who's been performing stand-up comedy for nearly a decade, and this year takes his new show The Cut to the Edinburgh Fringe and subsequently on an autumn tour of the UK. It's stand-up comedian Ben Pope. Do you remember comedy as being a big influence on you early on, like growing up?
Yeah, I think I've talked about this to a few people before. I can sort of pinpoint roughly when it kind of, when I was a child, we did used to watch a fair bit of TV with my parents. There was a lot of like French and Saunders and that kind of thing, and sketch shows and that being like this lovely sort of thing we would do as a family, and like Friday evening being quite nice. I remember that as like a nice thing, but I didn't really like get obsessed with it until I was a teenager. And I do just very strongly remember it must have been about January or February when I was like 15 or something, and coming home and seeing Bill Bailey part Droll on, they were like showing it on Channel 4, the whole show. Yeah. And I just remember sitting down and like kind of by accident and watching the entire thing with my mum and just being like immediately, oh, I have to watch more of that kind of thing right away. And so I watched like all of his specials. I spent all of my pocket money on like a 4 DVD box set from HMV to like watch all of like his things, and then Black Books, and that got me onto Dylan Moran, and they were like the two, and still to be honest, the two acts that I like sort of use as like a North Star for the stuff I like, kind of fun, observational, like fairly goofy, but with like a bit something a little bit more left field, a little bit more kind of, there's some kind of thought behind it, I guess, some kind of not just silliness for silliness' sake, but like something goofy, but with some philosophy behind it, I think. Yeah. And so, and then from there, it was just, it was like, I just very, and it was the kind of a perfect time to be getting into that kind of thing, because there was such a boom of, this is the late 2000s, early 2010s, like boom of like Mock the Week, when it was like the most sort of, kind of virtuosic and vicious, and so there's like, and like Russell Howard coming in, and suddenly there being this like big boom of like guys in jeans and t-shirts, and that being like, oh, these are like just like young guys who can do it. You can do it and be normal. You don't have to be like a guy in his 40s wearing a fancy suit. It doesn't have to be like old school kind of showmanship, which I also have a lot of love for. Particularly as I get older, I'm like, that makes more sense. But at the time, I was the right age to sort of see how like a kind of exciting young folks doing it was like, it made a lot of sense, and I was like, oh wow, this is great. I could do this, and then I just watched everything, and I consumed as much of it as possible. Bought albums and went for long deep dives on YouTube and everything, and then it just sort of snowballed from there.
So when you're thinking to yourself, I can do this, what was that path then that took you to doing comedy for yourself?
Well, it was at the same time, like simultaneously, I was sort of discovering at school that I was like a passable actor. Like I was doing a lot of like theatre stuff. Again, I have a very strong memory of like, there was like one, when I was about 14 or 15, around the same time, one drama teacher who there was like a school play, and it was specifically for like younger students to do. And I sort of thought, I'd had fun in drama class, but I didn't really think it was like for me, really. And then I just had a drama teacher who was like, I really think you should audition. And just that thing of someone, you know, telling you that they think you, well, or I suppose implicitly that they think you have something.
Yeah.
I was then like, oh, okay, so maybe that's what I could do. And then I started doing it, and then it was like, oh, this is amazing, and I love this, and I love making things, and I love like the creative process of this, and being in a room with people, and not having to do sport. You know, it was like a real like, oh, I can bunk off PE, and I can spend time in a room doing like silly voices and acting and faces, and so that became very like, you know, I knew I could perform. And so then it was kind of a hop, skip, and a jump to, oh, I love comedy and I know how to perform, or at least I'm enjoying performing. So maybe I could do both. But obviously there's not that many, at that age, if you're like 15 to, you know, 19, you can't really do comedy. You can, you know, be funny in a play at school, or you can be funny in your social group, which honestly, I probably wasn't really. I mean, there were some friends that I had, you know, I was funny too, but I was not like the class clown or anything. I was definitely more like, oh, Ben's a bit of a nerd, you know. So yeah, there's nowhere to exercise. So I was just making notes all the time. I was like writing jokes in like a notebook for like 4 years. And then I went to university, and part of the thing that I was very excited about going to university was that I went to Cambridge, and I knew they had like a comedy society, and they had the Footlights, and that was something you could get into. So I was really, by the time I arrived there, I was like primed and ready to like try and audition for everything. And I was like excited to try and, you know, work stuff out. So that, there was like I sort of, came at it laterally from theatre, I suppose.
Yeah. So we're always thinking with that sort of actor's mindset, other than stand-up, more like sketch and character, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess so. Although it's hard. I mean, it's weird. I kind of feel like, you know, if you watch my stuff now, I mean, and you have seen me fairly recently, I probably, most people, I think when they see me think, oh, Ben's like quite a good writer, rather than like, you know, my stuff is quite kind of wordy, or quite kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of like metaphors and imagery and structure and all these things. So I think now you would be more kind of tempted to say I was probably more of a, you know, more interested in the words than the performance, but I think I think there is something arriving at it. I didn't like go to a comedy club until I was like, I mean, to be honest, until I was performing in one, really. I mean, I went to go and see people at theatres, like you go and see, you know, Dara Ó Briain was doing like a big tour, and I went to go and see that with my parents or whatever. Yeah. But I didn't see like people doing 20-minute sets in a club until I was doing that, you know.
Yeah.
So there is something in coming at it from a bit more of a kind of flamboyant, theatrical, like not just about gags. I think that probably does leak into my stuff now. Is that I'm kind of interested in like larger. Like I love gags and I love writing jokes and I like to like churn jokes out. That's very fun. But equally, like I think there's a good happy medium between that and also like a bit of architecture, a bit of like experimenting with like a larger piece, you know. And that's definitely something I'm trying to do with my new show as well, which is like very joke heavy, but it is essentially one long story. Hopefully it feels like dense with jokes so that everyone can have a nice time, but equally there are like big set pieces that I can perform and that feel like a journey for people. Yes.
So doing the Footlights then, how did that live up to what you had in your mind when you approached it with all this enthusiasm and then you get involved? Was it what you thought it would be?
It was. It was, and it was actually it was more than I thought. It was better than I thought it would be. Even like I think I was always, you know, you see something on a website. Often with comedy, I think it's like such a weird thing in general about like comedy is that it's so hard to describe. And it's so like, I always feel like sorry for like reviewers in a sense, because they have to go and watch something. And then like comedy is so much about like these little tiny interactions in a room and like body language and all this stuff that's so ephemeral and like blows away in the wind and is like kind of nothing. And then they have to sit down and try and like transcribe that, and then inevitably they get it wrong, or they kind of just like fail to articulate the vibe, or what they take away from it is like very personal and therefore kind of like just so not what everyone else was taking away from it. And obviously there are better and worse reviewers, etc. But that's the same problem that you have in marketing comedy, right? It's like so hard to make a poster that like adequately describes the vibe of a show because you want to make it look good or cool or interesting, or you want to like articulate the humor of it.
Yeah.
But an image will never be what it is like in the room. Like I find so often you go and see a show because the poster looks like really like edgy and cool and like, wow, look at the graphics on that. That's awesome. And then you go in and it's someone doing like very good, but just like straight observational comedy for an hour. And so those are such a mismatched thing. And so I think I had that same worry when I was like going to university and seeing like the Footlights website and being like, oh my God, this is going to be so cool and like such an interesting like ideas sharing. I was really worried that I would arrive and it would be kind of sort of nothing, or like it would mostly be just more theatre or more plays, or it wouldn't have that like kind of that new thing which I didn't really understand or know yet, which was like comedians making stuff together. But then it was, and it was like there was a whole infrastructure. I mean, this is the one thing I know a lot of people have a lot of like stuff to say about, Cambridge comedians and like people coming out of Oxbridge, and in the same in any career, like it is so ridiculous how there is such a like density of people and the highest positions in loads of different industries that come from, a handful of sandstone buildings in 2 specific postcodes. Like that is crazy. And it obviously speaks to and is the symptom of a larger problem elsewhere in the rest of, but what I will say is like, as a model for like an infrastructure to make people good at comedy, like take it out of all of the context, which is very difficult to do, obviously, but, and it is really like, we were getting up every 2 weeks with new material to a room, to a theatre, like a 200-seater theatre that was always full at 11 p.m. And you could do new material every 2 weeks as a student, and you would be writing with other people, or you could like find new people, and then you were auditioning things all the time. There were a series of like larger shows every term. So there was like a pantomime and like a big review show and then a tour show. And then also, if you wanted to, you could be putting on your own shows in any of the smaller theatres. Like all of the colleges around the campus had like smaller theatres you could apply to put on a show. So you could very legitimately all year round be like making stuff and like churning things out and trying new things and like working with like a different combination of people. And that as like a crucible for like creative stuff is so great. And I just think like, it's such a shame that is not available to more people as a kind of as a way to start, because also like going onto the open mic circuit, starting there anywhere, like in any city really, but particularly in like big cities like London and Manchester or Edinburgh or whatever, it's grueling. It's like it's so hard. The atmosphere and it's you doing comedy that you're not very good at yet because you're just starting out, to other people, mostly who are in the same boat as you, in the bottom of a pub. There are no audience members, or there's like one audience member who only speaks Spanish. And and then the other people on the bill could be like quite serious about doing comedy, or they could be just very mentally unwell people who have just seen something's free to do and want to try it. And so like the kind of the gutter of that, of like being like, it's so hard to get out of and to get better in that sort of scenario. Whereas if you start, with like a very, and it's why I understand all these like, comedy schools and stuff, and, comedy courses make a lot of sense to me, even though, this feels something strange about learning comedy. But I do think there is something really nice about being in a space where lots of people have the same interest as you and want to try something, and you get to bounce stuff off loads of other people in a safe environment where your whole kind of self-esteem is not based off of this like one, you're one. I mean, so many people must stop doing comedy or quit after one gig because the gig they go to is like a nightmare and they don't have the skills to like know how to navigate a nightmare yet. Whereas if you kind of grow up with a kind of slightly more safe environment, you get ahead of steam. Yeah. And then when you do have a horrible gig, you can kind of bounce off it a little bit more because you've got a bit of, ego with which to do that,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I have nothing but good things to say about that experience. But it should be, that kind of thing should be available to more people, I think, for all the artistic, spheres, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about it being like this crucible of collaboration. And of course, after Cambridge, you had the Princess of Maine. So you've got, again, sketches and collaboration and working with people. But how did that differ then from the Footlights, striking out as a splinter group of your own? But more than that, then going into stand-up where you don't have collaboration, you are isolated and it's literally all about you. What's that journey, that process look like?
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like kind of, you're the booster rockets coming off the thing and you're just carrying on, just flying away. Yeah, I mean, there's like the joy of, what I will say is like it's really, the lovely thing is getting to work on one thing and make it better and to refine something. Because often when you're starting out, you are just like churning through things and throwing them away. Yeah. And it can feel after a while like you don't really have anything because you've got all these half-finished things that never got properly finished or were good enough to get you through whatever. Whereas, working with, I did a sketch show called Princess of Maine with my friends Jamie and Alex, who are both great screenwriters now. And they... it was so nice to be like, we built 3 hours of material, did 3 fringes in a row, and just working on putting that together, it meant you just sort of, you would constantly just like, it was like building something out of Lego or like a can of stones or whatever. You're just like constantly like taking stuff out, putting stuff in, just, how does this affect everything else?
Yeah.
And eventually you have like a construct, you've built this thing. And that's very satisfying. And also, I say particularly with like sketch, if you're doing it with other people, it's so sociable. We will never not be friends, the 3 of us, because that process is so like intense, really, and bankrupting, and it's a real journey you go on with that. So that was lovely. And then going, and I was kind of doing stand-up throughout that experience as well. But then, yes, I've done like maybe 3 or 4 hours now of my own stand-up. And that is different. I do like writing on my own. Like I am pretty good at being with just myself or having my own company. And, but it is lonely. And I think year on year, it gets weirdly lonelier as you get more successful with things, because there's less of the highs and lows aren't as high and low anymore. I think when you're starting out, it's very like when things go well, you're like, whoa, and it's and you get to share, you're with other people and you get to share that. And then the lows are like absolutely horrific, but eventually you come up from those and you're like, okay, maybe everything is going to be okay. And then as you get better and as you get a bit more like level-headed and sort of sensible as you get older, it becomes more like, in that middle band there, you get a bit more like, there's like little ups and downs, but it's all, it's all gravy. It's all part of the job. It's all part of the experience of doing it. And that, I think, that's nice. That's like allows you certain things. It allows you to be more of a stable person for the other people in your life. And it allows you to, it allows you to get ahead more. You get more experiences by being more reliable and all these things. You get more gigs, and equally, it also makes it slightly less, it can make it quite lonely. There are days where you're like, I don't mind, when you're younger, I could be on a 5-hour coach back from Cardiff where I went and did a gig, because if the gig went well, then I'm like elated for 5 hours on a bus, or if it went really badly, I'm spending that 5 hours working out why it went wrong and trying to going, gosh, this is going to be good material. I'll write about this horrible experience, But then when it's less of a kind of, you go to Cardiff, you get the coach back at 5, and it's 5 hours, and the gig went well, but it was material you knew would work, and you've done gigs like that before, and it's sort of been fine. You suddenly, the gig, you're on that bus, and you're like, oh, this was fine, and I had a good time, but also I could have been at home tonight. I could have been watching television with my girlfriend, So there's that the loneliness, I think, becomes a little bit more sort of weighs in a bit more as you go along. But I don't know. I also, you have to sort of weigh that against the joy of doing it still and being good at it, and reminding myself to be grateful that I get nice experiences and that they come fairly regularly, and that, I think it's a good lesson in just managing comfort and joy in your own life,
Yeah. So another aspect there is about being yourself. How much of that is you when you come from a background of doing sketches where you are playing somebody else? Now it's all about you, and how much of that is you, and how much is it a character that you're playing?
I think increasingly it gets more me. I think when I think particularly after the pandemic, I had a real moment during the pandemic where I didn't think that stand-up would come back. I was quite worried about that the whole thing might be over. So then when I started gigging again, it was really felt so lovely and loose, because I was like, well, this could all just disappear again. This is a nice thing I get to do.
Yeah.
And so I just, something internally, I just relaxed. And so suddenly it was more me on stage and less of this sort of nervous, I think I'd been told by so many people and reviewers that I was kind of like a kind of Jack Whitehall kind of character. And so I think I was playing up the poshness and playing up what, those kind of elements of my character, which is fine, but it's also it's not really what I think of myself. That's not part of my general identity. I am a privileged person, but, my mum was a librarian, my dad was a teacher. I'm middle class, I'm upper middle class. I'm in that kind of bracket, like a lot of comedians. So it's not that special. Whereas what is special about me, or is interesting about me, is my actual personality, who I actually am and what my interests are.
Yeah.
So suddenly I relaxed and I was able to talk about that kind of thing more, my worries or my, various kind of anxieties about things. And then that became, that became more me. I mean, it's still not exactly me. It's still me plus, me occasionally a bit more arrogant and occasionally a bit more kind of embarrassed or shameful, or me who's anxious very slightly about something, but I've really dialed it up, or, just things that just tweaked basically in service of where the humor is.
Yeah.
But I'd say it's every year it gets a bit closer, I think, to real me.
You mentioned lockdown there, and it's interesting. Up until that point, you'd done 6, 7 Edinburgh shows in a row at that point, be it sketch or stand-up, and then everything stops. And like you say, you're worried whether stand-up's going to come back. What is your mindset going in, and what did you do with that time? And then how did you make that transition to being able to come out onto the stage again? I know you touched on it a little bit.
I think it was I remember, so that year, 2020, I actually wasn't going to go up to the Fringe again. I was going to have a break, because the last few had been good, but quite tumultuous in various different ways, personally or just financially. I was really it had been so expensive, and it just hadn't really kicked off in the way I'd hoped it would. I had a fairly nice time, but it was just it's just it can be a really ruinous experience if you don't prepare properly, which I hadn't. I think I'd been quite kind of blasé about where the money would come from and all this stuff. And I actually found myself, working myself into a hole, both sides of the fringe, in order to pay for everything. And I was just very tired with that. And I think also it comes down to like, there's a jealousy thing as well. The people I came up with had sort of exploded or gone on to other stuff. And I had sort of trundled a bit upwards, but hadn't really had like this sort of success moment where everything kind of just like exploded.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was also feeling a bit kind of bummed out by that. And so I wasn't going to go up. And then the pandemic happened, and it was sort of this moment. I don't really remember how I felt at the beginning, other than like, oof, how am I going to pay for everything?
Sure.
At the time I was doing like 4 other jobs. So it was like, they were all like retail things or like receptionist jobs. So I was doing like workshops where you teach people how to make terrariums and things. I was like doing like a million different things. And so I was like just trying frantically to get everything together so that I would be able to like pay my rent and things like that. And then I think during that period, I went and stayed with my parents. My dad had Parkinson's disease. So I was like helping him and helping my mum, and my sister was there as well. And we were just all kind of like, let's be here if we're going to be here for 4 months or whatever. Well, we didn't know it would be 4 months at the time. We thought it might be potentially forever. So, So I think I was doing a lot of writing in that period. I was doing a lot of like journaling, and I was doing a lot of like reading and just sort of paying in, I guess, to the bank of creative things. I think there was a kind of really interesting feeling of everything being put on pause. And because it was a pause, and it was like a creative wide pause. It was like an industry wide pause. It was like it wasn't that thing of like, I'm taking a break.
Yeah.
But then you don't feel fully relaxed because there's other people who are sort of like getting on around you.
Sure.
It was this real feeling of like, everyone's stopped now.
Yeah.
So, and there was actually kind of a relief. And obviously there were people who were, now I would look back on and being like, oh, they were making some good choices because they were building like their online thing. But that wasn't really an option for me. I was like, I was quite busy, like caring for my parents and stuff. So it was, I didn't feel like there was I didn't have the time or the energy really to do that. So instead I was just kind of like doing a lot of thinking and, reading a lot and writing just anything that came to mind. And actually I think that was a really fertile period, because then when I came back to comedy, I suddenly had about 6 months of notes of just random stuff, really just anything that my mind had turned to. So this like big grab bag of just all sorts. When I was really worrying about the pandemic and stuff, and the effect it was. So I had loads of like thoughts about that, which they could then talk about on stage in those immediate gigs afterwards. And I also had all those things where, when you wanted to escape from thinking about it, really weird, abstract, whimsical stuff. Yeah. So there was a lot of like material, and also like memories. You sit there and I'd write loads about like, oh gosh, remember when we used to do this? Remember this? And suddenly I had like this big backlog of, like I've had a life now. I'm not like a 20-year-old who's just talking about whatever's in front of him right now. Like I was like 27. I was like, okay, let's talk about the last 7 years of my life. That's like a chunk, and it's one I've changed quite a lot within.
Yeah.
So I just came back to stand up with a bit more, as I said before, like a bit more relaxed and chilled out, because I was like, well, this could all just burn again. So, and then also with like a bank of stuff to talk about. So it felt very like freeing, I think. And obviously it feels bad in some sense to be talking about it in those terms, because obviously it was a horrid time for lots of people. But equally, like, as with all horrible things, there are flips of the coin.
Yeah.
And so it was a useful, like kind of interesting experiment, and it produced something, I think, quite like, made me a slightly more deeper, richer person and act as well, I think. Came out the other side felt a bit more older and mature, and sort of knew a bit more what I was doing.
Right. So coming out of the pandemic and returning to comedy then, in those subsequent few years you've done Brighton, you did the Vaults, you've done Camden, Bristol. This is the year that you're returning to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Why now? What's different?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I was like quite tired with the Edinburgh Fringe before the pandemic. And as it came back, I think it was the like lockdown year or two was so like socially, in terms of like, people were really questioning a lot of stuff, like structures and how things were working, the Black Lives Matter stuff. And, there was a lot of like Me Too stuff that came out, particularly within comedy actually. And also people were talking about like, exploitation and like workplace stuff. And I was definitely like reading a lot of that and processing it. And I had such a kind of, quite a crummy time at the Fringe the year before. And my show the year before 2020 was about work and workplace stuff and how it's so insane that the gig economy is like something we've all sort of paid into and gone like, yeah, that's great, that'd be a really good idea. And so I was thinking about all of this stuff, really like chewing it over. And so in the immediate aftermath, I was like, why would anyone go back to the Fringe? I understand it if you're like, you're an enormous act and you're going to make a load of money. Or if you're like doing your debut show, you've got a show and you need the industry to like see you and understand who you are.
Yeah.
But anyone in between those two things, I'm like, what are we doing? Why are we, and so I sort of really swore off it. And also it looked painful and difficult and overcrowded in the years after the Fringe. After the pandemic, it looked very like a bottleneck. And I was really like, I think last year or maybe the year before, I started to see people I really like, people I know who were like around my kind of, age group and, doing the same things as me roughly, at a point in their careers, were having a good time or making a name for themselves, or just seemed like they were having there was a way of doing it that wasn't pure like cattle market discomfort.
Yeah.
And so I thought about it and I was like, maybe I'll go back, but only when I have a show that I'm like really sure about and that I can do for a month or 2 weeks or whatever and not go crazy. And just to be, I think, not something that I've rushed and shoved together last minute. If I'm going to spend the money, I should spend the money on something that I think is worthwhile. And so, I wasn't really sure when that would happen.
Yeah.
But then last year, a load of stuff happened to me in quite quick succession that I was like, I wanted to write about and I write loads about, which, as you know, you've gotten to see the show in a work in progress form. I got circumcised for a medical issue. And then also my dad died and I was in a new relationship for the first time really properly in my adult life. And so suddenly there was like so much to talk about and the show kind of started to quite quickly gather like bones and then it had flesh and I was like, oh, this is a show. This is a real show. And then I was like, you know what? I could, if I were to take a show to the Fringe, this would probably be it. And the timing just worked out, and there was a few other like spinning plates that made it worthwhile. And so yeah, I was like, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to go all in and see what it's like.
Yeah.
And now we're here. Now I'm promoting it, trying to make people come to it. And it's I will say, a difficult show to promote. I think I know that it's funny and that I am funny and that there's loads of gags and there's loads of silly stories and there's like emotional heft to it and like structurally it's work. But the one liner for the show is, the slogan is like, this is a show about a man who got circumcised. That is immediately not that appealing to a lot of people. So I'm trying to work out how to sell it to people. But I think it's, it's relatable. It's about like bodies and anxiety about your body and male kind of reticence about dealing with health problems. And it's about family dynamics and relationship dynamics. And so those are all things that everyone has, you know. So hopefully that'll be the way that, what people take away from it, but equally the way that I can get people through the door, bums on seats to see it.
Yeah.
It's called Ben Pope The Cut, which is a title that hopefully has multiple meanings if you've seen the show. There are a lot of knives in the show, and there's a lot of things being severed from other things. And yeah, that's hopefully it is a title that like provokes some kind of. I was hoping, my hope for the show is that people come out of it and they have a really good time. That's the main thing. Maybe have a think about some of the like themes of the show, but also I've thought very carefully about how everything interconnects with everything else, and there's a lot of like little grace notes that all kind of sort of interconnect, and lots of little references that reference other stuff in the show. So I really hope it's one of those things that people can come up afterwards and be like, that's quite like that links to that. That's my ideal audience reaction. But obviously I need to make sure I make it clear so people can enjoy it like that. But that's something I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah. When you're at a festival like the Fringe, do you take time to go and see other shows? Do you still go and see comedians? Can you watch it as an entertainment, or now do you have that sort of comedian's mindset where you don't laugh, you just nod and consider? Yeah,
it's tough. I think during the Fringe, I'm pretty good at going and seeing other people's stuff because I am always interested. It feels a bit like my friend Jamie described it once as like it's a good way of seeing what everyone's been up to this year.
Yeah.
You know, there's like a real. Often people are just talking about the stuff that's happened to them in the last, sort of 365 days. So you kind of you can go like, oh, I didn't realize thinking you'd had a baby, or like, oh my gosh, they went to Nepal and had a big experience. So there's all of that which I quite like, and I love watching people who are like. I've talked to a lot of people about this recently. I'm really enjoying when I can get the opportunity to see people who are, because I think often you can get quite stuck when you're on the circuit, seeing people who are at your level or like slightly younger than you coming up. Like often if you're like headlining gigs or if you're like emceeing stuff, and often, it can be like people who whose stuff you've seen a million times, who are at the same sort of level as you, and then people who are like coming up from, and that's lovely. And it's quite a nice ego boost sometimes to be like, oh, I'm the king of the gig. I'm the person I've been here going the longest or whatever. And that is a nice like, oh, I'm doing okay kind of feeling. But equally, if you're doing that all the time, you're not seeing that many people who are like much better than you. And it's really important, I always think, to see those people, because, often those people are like headlining gigs that, you're not on, or they're on tour, or they're like, they're doing, they do other shows that you don't see, or there's like shows you've not like, you're not in with that certain club and whatever it is. And actually, it's so important to see people who are like doing stuff that you can't do yet, because it gives you this quite inspiring. You get to like see, I always say whenever I see John Kearns or like Ivo Graham, whenever he's doing like sort of like amazing, he's really good at crowd work, and I just love watching him do crowd work. Or who else is a good example? I love watching Helen Bauer. She's just like just complete superstar, like just the sheer kind of sort of whirlpool of confidence and whatever. And watching people like that, I'm always like, oh, this is great, because this reminds me there's like an attic in this building, and there is stuff that you can keep going up, and there's stuff you haven't learned how to do yet. And so I always really enjoy that experience. So that's always like another thing. And particularly again at the Fringe, really great, because there's so many people doing like completely lateral stuff to you. There's people doing the clown stuff. There's people doing like, stuff that's like somewhere closer to theatre, or there's stuff, more sketch stuff or character stuff, which again, fun to watch as entertainment, but also you can learn something from it because there'll be something in it that maybe makes you laugh in a way you don't laugh at straight stand up. So maybe there's a kind of, you can pick something up for your. I always think sometimes when I watch character acts, I'm like, it's so funny the way they say that word. That word's really funny. Ooh, now I have a new word that I know is like a funny word that has funny potential. So when it comes up when I'm emceeing or something, I now know that do you know what I mean? It just it lights different vocabulary or ticks or, and just, you just pick up stuff all the time. Yeah. So I like that experience. I tell you, when I'm not at like a festival or I'm not at a gig, I don't really go out to see that much stuff. Right. Just because it's a bit of a busman's holiday. Sure. And if I'm watching stuff at home on like Netflix or whatever, I tend not to watch British acts because I find it somehow there's something a bit workmanlike about it. Basically because I think there's that feeling of like, oh, I'm sort of, two thingies of separation away from that person. Yeah. Something about it feels strange. Whereas I love to watch American acts on TV because it feels like this sort of slightly shiny, mythic, like Hollywoody thing, which then feels like something that's kind of inspiring or something you can aim towards or something. Yeah. It gives you that sense of separation that I find quite useful for giving me like an oomph. Yeah. But yeah, I find it like, like I love James Acaster is really fun to watch. But I would much rather see him live than watch him on Netflix because I just find it quite strange to be sitting in go to a gig, come home, and then sit down on my sofa and watch someone who I know is like in the next postcode. Do you know, there's something strange about that. I don't know where James Acaster lives, but in the UK. Do you know what I mean? There's something slightly less magical about watching British comedians on telly when you are British. For me, anyway.
You talked there a little bit about comedians who might be on a different plane, a different level, call it what you will. Do you set objectives for yourself about where you want to be, or broader than that, places you want to play or comedians you want to work with in some way? Do you have those kinds of targets and objectives?
Yeah, I think I've been sort of working out what that would be a lot this year, because this year I have kind of zoned in on doing this show at the Fringe, and then after that I'm taking it on tour. So I'm doing a tour about 8, possibly 10 venues. I can't remember quite where, how many, but all over the country, and so that's been like the focus, and that's been like, I need to sell tickets for this. I need maybe a bit more of like an online presence so I can sell more tickets for that. And I love this show. I want people to see it. Yeah. I have also this year done some tour support for like a few people, for Nick Mohammed, who does Mr. Swallow, and Alex Keeley, who's a really good like political comedian. And they've been playing slightly larger rooms. Nick Mohammed particularly I played like in 1,000-seater Victorian theatre in Cardiff, which by the way was not the Cardiff gig. That was a theoretical Cardiff gig I was talking about earlier. That was not, this gig was like, that was a real like mind-blowing thing. And it really made me go, and I've had this a couple of times over the last year where I've been doing slightly larger rooms just by dint of like supporting someone or, getting onto a bill where I'm maybe the least experienced person there or whatever. Right. Those larger rooms feel very different. And I feel like I've got a lot of skill within like a small intimate room. Now I've kind of built up that kind of armory and those tools, but I don't have like, or at least I'm learning how to do these like big rooms where you've kind of, everything has to be a little bit slower or clearer. But also there's this much larger potential for a much bigger rolling laugh and and more theatrical as well. And I had so much fun doing those gigs. That's really opened like a trapdoor up to another thing where I've been like, oh, that's what I'd love to be doing. Eventually, I would love to be playing rooms that big. Yeah. Because also, like, I also love those buildings so much. There's a real, and this probably goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about like starting from doing like school theatre and stuff. It's like, I love theatre spaces. Yeah. I love comedy clubs. Comedy clubs are kind of have a real like fun, exciting kind of groove to them. And I particularly like doing them for the first time, coming up when you go from being like quite a young person who doesn't really ever go to rooms like that, unless you're going to like a nightclub, just suddenly being like the person in charge of the whole vibe of one of those rooms. Very exciting.
Yes.
But then theaters, I just love, like the backstage spaces in theaters are so just, there's something very magical about it. And they're often really beautiful buildings. And they all have so much like history, which is so, you can feel it in the bones of the building, which I just love. It's a really, I'd love to do more of that kind of thing. Because it just, it just feels very special. And also it feels closer to like the MO. I think often, sometimes in comedy clubs, it can feel a bit like, your kind of music, your sort of background noise for something, or you're just there to sort of push a few buttons and make people go like, and then they leave. And it sort of feels a bit more functional, which is great and is very fun and has its own, is sometimes exactly what you want. But I think when you're doing stuff in a theater, it feels a lot more like you're giving people a show. And like, I love that. I love the idea of like giving people like a big, juicy, entertaining show. That really appeals to me. And so it feels way more like if I wanted to have like a life's work, it would be giving people a show, Anyway, that's maybe a bit delusions of grandeur there, but I don't know. It feels, that's what I'm aiming towards, I think. And I don't know how I'll get there, but we'll see. That would be the dream.
Well, with that image in mind, then, what have thus far been your best and worst experiences in comedy? So that is a really good question. There have definitely been. Let's start with worst ones, because they're often like, there are some gigs that I just will never forget in a million years. Like I did a gig when I was still at university, and they'd sort of like got into, it was like a charity for muscular dystrophy, and they got in touch to be like, will the Footlights do something? And I sort of brought together a few people it was like during exam term, so not that many people were free. So I got together like a kind of ragtag group of us who were available, and I tried to work out what material we would do. So a bit of sketch and a bit of stand-up and stuff. But often with those kind of charity gigs, particularly where it's not that well publicized, the vibe is very serious. And then it wasn't very publicized very well, so there was not very many people there, but they'd hired out an entire like 400-seat lecture theatre and had sat everyone disparately around it. And there was just this moment where there wasn't really a green room or anywhere to come on from, so we were hidden behind like a door at the back of the stage. So just like, we would erupt from nowhere it was very strange. And the lady who introduced us forgot to tell me that there would be someone giving a speech at the beginning of the gig, and it was someone with muscular dystrophy who had come on in like an electric wheelchair with a like special like guide dog style, sort of assistance dog, and he came out and gave a very moving and sad speech. And then the lady who's running the gig was like, "We're going to have the best night ever. Please welcome to the stage, Ben Pope." And I kind of erupt through the door to be like, "Hi." And obviously this guy's wheelchair just takes a very long time to move. So I started doing comedy, and he was still leaving the in full view of everyone, with the guide, and the dog was more interested in me than going with him. And it was just, and also, so everyone was paying attention to that. And also I was, maybe a year or two into doing stand-up, and I was doing it maybe once or twice a term. So I had no skills with which to deal with this environment. And so I bombed for 10 minutes for charity
which just feels so grim. And I think I remember I'd just been to America on holiday with my parents. So I had some material about how annoying Americans were. And I did that, and then I asked like someone in the front row, and like about 80% of the people in the room were American, and it was just like a absolute Venn diagram of everything going wrong. You know, but there's plenty of others as well. I'll never forget doing like Piccadilly Comedy Club, which I think still runs, but it used to do it. It used to be like pretty much right next to the Comedy Store. And I remember doing it once when I was like 23 or something, and there was 3 rows of estate agents all on one work do in the front, like, you know. And I think there were people at the back who were having quite a nice time, but because there was this huge buffer of people who were not interested in comedy, they just all wanted to talk to each other. Yeah. And I, again, not equipped to deal with them. And it just petered out, and they just all just started talking between themselves. And so there's just me talking, an entire bank of like 3 rows of estate agents all yapping together. And at the back, people being like, what the fuck is going on? And then as I left the stage, I heard one of the estate agents turned to me and just went, yeah, sit down, Ben. And I just, that was like, you know, when you're just like, this is one of those phrases where it's in and of itself quite inoffensive, but the way in which he said it, I will have that in my brain for the rest of my life. It was just truly those kind of really, they put you in your place. But then best moments. Yeah. There have been plenty. I remember as Princes of Maine, the sketch group, we did a charity show, it was a good charity show for Parkinson's UK, and we did it at the Comedy Store, and we were like by far the least experienced people on the bill, but because of like my relationship with the charity, they'd invited us to do it. And so we were really nervous, and we were like by far the least experienced. Like it was like Stuart Lee and like, you know, Ellis James and like Tiff Stevenson, like really like big acts. Yeah. And then us, and we were sort of, I think, halfway through the show or something. And then we just, because we were so nervous, we drank loads of coffee, and we were like, and then we just had like we had like one of the best shows of our life. Like it was like so fun. And we did a bit of crowd work with someone who like, I think we'd said at the beginning that we all looked like we worked at the Apple store or something because we were all in like grey t-shirts and everything. And some guy held out his phone, and like Jamie took it and pretend to confiscate it for the gig. And it was like a silly bit, but it just like everyone was on side immediately. And it was just one of those things where like the odds of it going well versus how well it went it was like the perfect little sort of graph. And you just walk away from that being like, oh my God, maybe I will have a career and maybe this will work out. So yeah, that kind of thing is really nice.
Yeah.
And like as a nice little kind of bookend to that, we did, Jamie no longer does comedy, but my friend Alex McKeith does. He's like a musical comedian. He was in Princes with me, and together we have occasionally we do like a like seasonal show where we'll do sort of it'll be a mixed bill lineup, but we'll do, you know, some material about, you know, Halloween or Pancake Day, or you know, we did a Midsummer one and like things like that. And then last year we did like a big fundraiser for Parkinson's again at the Pleasance Theatre, and we did it with a raffle, and we did like a big, you know, we got loads of acts we really liked, and we just did a load of like our best material, and we did it in like DJs and had like a real like that was really special, particularly like, you know, my dad passed away last year, so it was sort of in remembrance of him as well. So like things like that where, you know, you're able to help and do something good outside of, you know, that's not self-interested, but you can do it, and it's better because you have worked on your skill and talent in the thing. And that was a really nice, like, this is a nice gift we can give, rather than like what's good for me and what's good for those things always feel quite nice, that's for sure.
So how can we find out about you and where we can come and see you performing?
all of my stuff in the sort of like tickets for things and where I am are all on my website, which is benpopecomedy.com. www.benpopecomedy.com if you're a completist. And then on Instagram, I'm at Popes Benedict, which is like Eggs Benedict, but with popes. And I'm also on TikTok, although that's harder to find stuff that I do, but you can find me on TikTok if you want. And that's also at Popes Benedict. And I am doing, what am I doing? I'm doing the Edinburgh Fringe. That's really the big thing. If you want to come and see me, come and see the Cut Show, which is every day apart from the 13th of August in the Assembly Box in Edinburgh. Or come and see me on tour in the autumn, in September, October, November. I am going to, let's see if I can remember them all, Brighton and Bristol and Bath and Oxford and Cambridge and Edinburgh and Glasgow. And I think that might be it. I think that's it. Also possibly Cardiff. I'm working on a Cardiff date at the moment. So if anyone's in Cardiff, then look out for that. But yeah, so yeah, do come and follow me there and come and see me if you would like. I would like you to, but it is up to
you. So last question then is always the same. How, Ben, would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
I think comedy is, for me, it's like a plaything, I think. It can be so many things. You know, it can be something that you use to make a point. You can use it to just as a sort of completely apolitical kind of mucking about thing. You can use it as a gift. You can use it as like a weapon. You can use it as all kinds of things. But I think at its core, it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube. You know, it's like this thing that you can keep tinkering with your entire life. And it keeps coming up with loads of different combinations. And it'll never stop being enjoyable as long as you keep playing with it, basically.
Ben, thank you so much for being my guest. I've had a great time listening to you. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me, Mark. Cheers.